When God says, shut this door, the first one he often points to is the door of toxic relationships. You see, not every person in your life is meant to stay in your life. Some were sent for a season, some for a lesson, and only a few for a lifetime. The danger comes when we keep doors open to relationships that were never sanctioned by God. You can love people and still not give them unlimited access to your spirit, your mind, or your future. What makes a relationship toxic is not just that it feels difficult, but that it consistently pulls you away from your purpose, away from your peace, and away from God's voice. The scriptures are filled with examples of people who were hindered or even destroyed by the company they kept. Samson didn't lose his strength in a single moment. He lost it through repeated compromises with Delilah, someone who never truly had his best interest at heart. Judas walked with Jesus himself, yet his hidden motives poisoned not only his own soul, but also brought destruction to the lives around him. Toxic relationships don't always look dangerous on the surface. Sometimes they come in the form of people who flatter you, people who seem supportive, or people who promise loyalty but secretly resent your growth. That's why discernment is so critical. If God tells you shut this door, it's not because he wants to isolate you, it's because he wants to protect you. Think about how relationships influence the trajectory of your life. The wrong voices in your ear can delay you for years. The wrong people in your circle can strip you of confidence and make you question the very calling God placed inside you. Toxic people often have a way of normalizing dysfunction, convincing you that drama is just part of life, or that betrayal is something you have to tolerate. But God's word says bad company corrupts good character. If that was true in Paul's day, it's still true today. Who you allow access to your heart and your mind matters more than almost anything else, because relationships are spiritual in nature. They don't just influence you, they imprint themselves on your soul. Now, shutting the door doesn't always mean a dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it's simply limiting access. Sometimes it means no longer seeking validation from people who have proven they can't celebrate you without envying you. Sometimes it means quietly distancing yourself from those who only show up when they need something but disappear when you do. Shutting a door is not an act of hatred, it is an act of wisdom. Even Jesus, who loved everyone, did not entrust himself to everyone. He had 12 disciples, but among them he had 3 he drew especially close. And even among those 3, there were things only he and the Father shared. That is a model for us. Love widely, yes, but guard access wisely. There's also another side to this. When you refuse to shut the door on toxic relationships, you're essentially telling God you don't trust him to provide better ones. Many people stay connected to relationships that hurt them because they're afraid of being alone. They would rather tolerate poison than experience a season of solitude. But here's the truth. Solitude with God will heal you, while the wrong company will kill you. When God calls you to shut a door, he's not leaving you empty. He's preparing you for divine connections that will build you up instead of tearing you down. You cannot receive what God has for you if your hands are still gripping what he's trying to remove. We live in a world that glorifies tolerance, that says you must accept everyone's energy into your space in order to be kind. But discernment is not cruelty, it's maturity. You don't have to vilify someone to recognize they are not aligned with your destiny. Remember, even good people can be the wrong people if they're pulling you in a direction opposite from where God is leading you. Not everyone who is toxic is evil. Sometimes they're just not healthy for you, and that's reason enough to shut the door. This requires courage, because shutting the door means you may lose approval, you may face criticism, and you may even feel a temporary sense of loss. But what you gain in return is far greater: clarity, peace, and the ability to hear God's voice without interference. Toxic voices drown out God's whisper. When you let them linger, their noise fills the space that was meant for his instruction. And if there's anything the enemy wants, it's to keep you surrounded by people who make you second-guess God's direction. Shutting the door is not just relational, it's spiritual warfare. Let me also remind you of this. The enemy rarely sends temptation without attaching it to a person. When the devil wanted to bring down Samson, he didn't send an army, he sent Delilah. When he wanted to betray Jesus, he didn't come with a pitchfork, he whispered into Judas. Pay attention to who is in your circle. Pay attention to those who have your ear. Sometimes the most dangerous door is not the one wide open to obvious sin, but the one cracked open to a relationship you should have closed a long time ago. God is speaking to some of you right now. You know there are doors in your life that need to be shut. You've been keeping them cracked, telling yourself you can handle it, telling yourself it's not that serious. But God sees what you cannot see. He knows the trajectory of your life, and He knows the influence of that relationship. Obedience to close the door now could save you years of heartache later. So, if God is saying to you today, shut this door, do not delay. Do it with humility, do it with grace, but do it with conviction. Your destiny is too precious to gamble with. Your peace is too valuable to compromise, and your relationship with God is too vital to let anyone interfere with it. Here's the truth I want you to leave with. Not every relationship is meant to be carried into your next season. Some doors must be shut before God can open the right ones. If you're brave enough to close what He's asking you to close, you'll discover that what He has ahead is worth infinitely more than anything you leave behind. Closing statement. Shut the doors God has marked as dangerous because your destiny depends on it. The wrong people can derail you, but the right obedience can deliver you. Choose obedience today and watch how God honors your decision tomorrow. When God tells us to shut doors, one of the most overlooked but critical ones is the door of hidden compromises. These are not the loud, obvious sins that everyone can see. These are the subtle decisions we make in private, the quiet allowances we give ourselves, the rationalizations we whisper when no one is watching. The problem with compromise is that it rarely announces itself as destructive. It presents itself as small, manageable, harmless. But in time, what looks like a crack in the foundation becomes a collapse of the whole structure. Compromise works slowly, almost invisibly. It starts with what seems insignificant. A little dishonesty here, a little cutting of corners there, a decision to ignore a conviction, to silence that tug in your conscience just for the sake of convenience. And yet, every compromise is a seed. When planted, it grows, and if left unchecked, it produces fruit you never intended to eat. The Bible warns us about the little foxes that spoil the vine. It's not always the storm that destroys the harvest. Sometimes it's the small hidden predators that go unnoticed until it's too late. Think about the story of Lot. He didn't wake up one day in Sodom because of one bold, reckless decision. He arrived there step by step, compromise by compromise. First he pitched his tent near Sodom, then eventually inside Sodom, and finally his family was entangled in the culture of Sodom. What began as proximity ended as captivity. That is the nature of compromise. It eases you into environments and habits that you once thought you'd never tolerate. Now here's the part we often miss. Compromise isn't just about actions, it's about alignment. Every time you compromise, you are aligning yourself with something less than God's best. You are saying, I can handle this on my own. I can bend just a little, and it won't affect me. But spiritually, compromise dulls your discernment. It numbs your sensitivity to the Spirit's voice. And the more you silence that inner conviction, the harder it becomes to hear when God is warning you of real danger. The enemy doesn't need you to fall in one dramatic collapse. He just needs you to erode slowly over time until you're too weak to resist when the big test comes. Psychologically, compromise is also dangerous because it reshapes your identity. Every small decision reinforces a story you tell yourself about who you are. If you tell yourself it's okay to lie a little, then over time you're no longer a person who tells the truth. You've become a person who deceives. If you tell yourself it's just one time, it doesn't matter. That one time creates a precedent that changes how you see yourself. Before long, compromise no longer feels like compromise, it feels normal, and when dysfunction becomes normal, destruction is inevitable. Philosophically, compromise can be understood as the fragmentation of the self. We are made to live whole and integrated lives where our actions match our values, where our inner convictions match our outward behavior. But when we compromise, we split ourselves. We live one way outwardly, while knowing inwardly we've betrayed what we stand for. That kind of split creates anxiety, guilt, and shame because the soul cannot thrive in contradiction. And yet, when people ignore that inner dissonance, they harden themselves to it. That's when the danger multiplies, not because they compromise once, but because they stop feeling the weight of compromise altogether. This is why shutting the door to hidden compromises is not about legalism. It's about protection. It's about keeping your heart aligned, your mind sharp, your spirit sensitive. God does not call us to perfection in our own strength, but He does call us to integrity, to live in such a way that what He whispers in private is reflected in how we live in public. If the enemy can't get you to fall with obvious sin, he will try to get you through subtle compromise. But the end result is the same distraction, delay, and ultimately destruction. I want you to think about this in your own life. Where are the small cracks? Where are the places you've told yourself it's not that serious? Maybe it's the entertainment you consume, the conversations you entertain, the shortcuts you take when you think no one is watching. Maybe it's the bitterness you've allowed to linger, the anger you excuse, or the lack of discipline you justify. Compromise may look harmless now, but one day it will demand payment, and the price is always more than you thought you'd pay. Closing the door to compromise is not easy because it often means confronting your own patterns. It means saying, I refuse to live double-minded. I refuse to live split. It may require cutting off certain habits, restructuring your environment, or confessing things you've tried to hide. But freedom always begins with honesty. You can't shut the door on what you refuse to admit is there. Remember, God's grace is not a license to keep compromising, it's the empowerment to stop. His Spirit gives you the ability to walk in integrity when your flesh wants to bend. He equips you to say no when everything in you wants to say just this once. Grace is not just forgiveness for past compromise, it is strength for present conviction. And when you shut that door, you create space for His power to move more freely in your life. Let me leave you with this. Doors left cracked open are still open. If you know there are compromises in your life, don't settle for halfway obedience. Don't settle for partial closure. Shut the door completely. Protect your integrity, because it is the foundation upon which every blessing God wants to give you rests. Without it, the blessing will slip through your hands. Closing statement. Small compromises grow into great consequences, but one decisive act of obedience can close the door for good. Choose integrity over convenience, and you'll find that God's best always outweighs the world's shortcuts. One of the most destructive doors we often leave wide open without realizing it is the door of past offenses. We carry old wounds like baggage, dragging them into new seasons, new opportunities, and even new relationships. And while we tell ourselves we've moved on, the truth is, many of us are still living as prisoners of the past. The danger here is not simply that someone hurt us, it's that we continue to let the hurt dictate our present and shape our future. When God says, shut the door, He's not being dismissive of the pain. He's inviting us into freedom. Offense is a powerful thing because it touches the deepest parts of our identity. When someone wrongs you, betrays you, or mistreats you, it's not just about what they did, it's about what it says to you about your worth, your trust, your place in the world. And because of that, offense doesn't just stay in the past, it embeds itself in the heart, and if left unaddressed, it grows roots of bitterness. Bitterness is subtle. At first, it may show up as just irritation or avoidance, but over time, it changes how you see people, how you interpret situations, and even how you view God. Psychologists will tell you that when the brain experiences a wound, whether physical or emotional, it creates pathways that are strengthened every time you rehearse the memory. That means when you replay what someone did to you over and over again in your mind, you're not just remembering it, you're reinforcing it. You're literally wiring your brain to relive the pain. And the more you rehearse, the harder it becomes to release. That's why shutting the door to past offenses is so difficult, because sometimes we've built our very identity around them. Think about Joseph. His brothers betrayed him, sold him into slavery, lied to their father, and abandoned him. If anyone had a right to carry offense, it was Joseph. Yet when his brothers finally stood before him years later, his perspective wasn't rooted in bitterness, it was rooted in purpose. He told them, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." That's the key. Joseph had shut the door on offense, And because of that, he was able to see God's hand where others could only see human betrayal. If Joseph had held on to bitterness, he would have never stepped into his destiny. When you leave the door of offense open, it does more than just poison your emotions. It distorts your discernment. You begin to see new people through the lens of old pain. Someone tries to bless you, but you don't trust it because you've been hurt before. God sends new opportunities, but you sabotage them because you assume the outcome will be the same as the last time. You end up projecting yesterday's betrayal onto today's relationships, which keeps you trapped in cycles of disappointment. In other words, your offense doesn't just keep you connected to the past, it steals your future. Philosophically, we might say that holding on to offense is a way of surrendering your freedom to someone else's actions. You are essentially saying, what they did still defines me. True freedom requires reclaiming the power to define yourself by God's truth, not by human failure. To forgive is not to excuse or forget. It is to refuse to let another person's choices determine your destiny. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the ultimate act of strength because it declares, I will not allow the poison of the past to dictate the promise of my future. Now let's be clear. Shutting the door to past offenses doesn't mean pretending the wound never happened. It means acknowledging it, grieving it if necessary, and then making a deliberate choice not to let it control you anymore. There's a difference between remembering and reliving. You can remember something without letting it rule your emotions. You can acknowledge what was done without allowing it to dictate how you move forward. But here's the challenge. Offense often disguises itself as protection. We tell ourselves, I'll never let anyone hurt me like that again. And while boundaries are healthy, walls built from bitterness are not. Boundaries guard your heart, but bitterness locks it away. And when your heart is locked away, not only are you safe from pain, you're also closed off from love, from joy, from connection, and even from God's voice. That's why shutting the door to offense is so urgent. It's not just about what you're keeping out, it's about what you're keeping in. Spiritually, God cannot pour new wine into old wineskins. He cannot release new blessings into a heart that's still full of yesterday's poison. That's why Jesus repeatedly emphasized forgiveness, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary for freedom. He said, if you don't forgive others, your Father in heaven will not forgive you. Why? Because forgiveness is not just a moral command, it's a spiritual law. If you refuse to release, you cannot receive. Holding on to offense keeps your hands too full to grasp what God is trying to give you. So let me ask you, who are you still carrying with you into this season? Whose name still triggers that knot in your stomach? Whose actions still replay in your mind late at night? Whoever it is, recognize this by holding on to the offense. You're allowing them to live rent-free in your heart, shaping your emotions, your decisions, and even your relationship with God. Shutting that door is not about them, it's about you. It's about reclaiming your peace, your clarity, your future. Here's the good news. You don't have to do this alone. God's Spirit empowers you to forgive even when your flesh resists. His grace makes possible what feels impossible. And when you shut that door, you're not just removing bitterness, you're making space for healing, for restoration, and for divine peace that passes understanding. Closing statement. Past offenses lose their power the moment you decide they will no longer define you. Shut the door, release the weight, and step into the freedom God has already prepared for you.